Welcome to Tradies Who Lead, the podcast about everyday leadership for everyday legends. I'm Ashley Baltecki, diesel mechanic by trade and your host. In this podcast, we hear from trade leaders from all industries and job titles about how they show up as an everyday leader so that we can learn from them and level up our leadership skills on the side. In this episode, we cover what it means to lead ourselves first and how a lack of empathetic listening is the biggest gap in our industries today. Today, we're joined by a legend in the building sector, Mick Hawes. As the host of the Toolshed Podcast and the founder of Builders Business Blackbelt, Mick is a leading mentor in the construction industry. Drawing on decades of hands-on coaching, he empowers builders to transform their businesses from sources of stress into profitable, rewarding enterprises. Mick's methodology goes beyond surface-level tactics, focusing on installing robust systems and fostering a powerful leadership mindset for sustainable, long-term success. He provides owners with a strategic framework to reclaim their time, lead with confidence, and finally achieve the freedom they set out for. Through his influential podcast and coaching programs, Mick is dedicated to a simple outcome, helping builders earn more, work less, and build a business that fuels a truly fulfilling life. Thanks for joining me on the podcast today, Mick.
Thank you for having me. We've been trying to get it together for a little while, but technology.
A good segue into the challenges of being a leader, obviously overcoming barriers and still trying to show up at our best. What does leadership mean to you?
I guess in really simple terms, creating an attractive environment and culture and philosophy that the people in your team want to follow. I guess over the years, observing a lot of leadership, it tended to be, or what many people thought it was me telling you what to do was leadership. But you know, I think it really is understanding the importance of nurturing and understanding your team, and finding out what each individual in the team needs to be supported, or how they need to be supported and nurtured so they can be as successful as you can help them become, I guess.
So it sounds like it's really about bringing out the best in other people instead of that old school mentality of I'm just going to tell you what to do and you have to do what I say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the real effective leaders understand that there's probably a bunch of people in their team that can do most things better than they can. And so they're happy to put ego aside and try and find the people that are really good at certain things and be able to put them in those positions in the team. So the whole performance of the business and the team is optimal, but everyone enjoys what they're doing. I mean, I don't think there's anything that sucks more than having to do stuff you hate or you're not very good at just because somebody told you that's the position that needs to be filled.
When did your leadership journey begin? Where did it start? What kicked it off?
At least learning about it. I don't know that I was in a leadership position, but maybe back in the very early 1990s, maybe 1991, something like that. I was living the dream selling life insurance. I did that for a couple of years, which was my introduction to all sorts of personal development and mindset, and finding all of the mentors like Stephen Covey and Jim Rohn and Zig Ziglar and all of these amazing people, and just being on that personal development journey, learning about leadership. And I guess the first introduction to the concept was self-leadership, which I still believe today. It's like really difficult or impossible to lead others until and unless you can lead yourself, which is no mean feat, you know, overcoming all of the challenges about, you know, I don't feel like doing this and I don't want to do that and that's too hard and that's too difficult. You've got to be able to overcome all of those sorts of personal challenges, I think, to become an effective leader, because to ask other people or encourage other people to do some of the things that you're not prepared to do, I think creates a fair degree of incongruency. It's not congruent when you're asking somebody to do something that you're not prepared to do. So I think the leadership journey started with that, like learning how to lead yourself, which I'm still trying to figure out.
And it sounds like it is that combination of not only the discipline of sometimes doing the hard work or the uncomfortable work with ourselves, but then also showing up with integrity. Now, I know that you're currently a mentor and coach to many people through Builders Business Blackbelt. How do you ensure you're showing up as a leader every day in that space where you're obviously now being the mentor and the coach for other people?
I find it challenging, but at the end of the day, I think the real key is to be open to change and be consistently learning and listening to other people's ideas and opinions and philosophies, and constantly challenging yourself and saying, is this the best way that I can currently find of doing things? Like a classic example of that, the first thing that popped into my mind was years ago when all I used to ever teach was time management. We used to talk about work-life balance. Bear in mind that I'm, in my 65th year. So this was a long time ago, like 35 years ago, talking about work-life balance. If I don't know whether you'd probably read about it in the history books where mobile phones didn't exist. Like it was this amazing thing when we learned about these things that were that big. They looked like a World War II handheld walkie-talkie that you'd buy a specific belt clip for, and you put it on your belt to carry it around, just about rip your pants off. But back in that time, learning about personal development and leadership was really important. Back then, everything was different, and having work-life balance was kind of possible because we didn't have this connection like we've got now. Like we've got this people want instant responses, and I've reached out to you and I've been waiting here for a minute. Why haven't you returned my call or texted or what have you? So what is actually possible to have some form of work-life balance? You could go home on the weekends and forget about work. So we talked about that, and it was really important for your mental well-being, your emotional well-being, to have balance. And I don't believe that anymore. Like in this day and age, I don't believe in work-life balance. I believe in work-life harmony, which fundamentally means that, in my opinion anyway, that the key is to learn how to enjoy everything you're doing, no matter when you're doing it. So in my case, I want to do the best I can to support our members. And so if they need to have a conversation, or they're troubled or challenged about something at 8:00 on a Sunday night and they call me, I'm going to take the call, because it is obviously important to them. Like they wouldn't bother me if it wasn't important. But I've got to figure out ways of enjoying doing that, no matter when I'm doing it. So I enjoy the people that we coach. They're really great people. I enjoy hanging out with them. So it's not an impost for me to talk to them at 8:00 on a Sunday night. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. But by the same token, to get the balance and the harmony, it's really important for me to be able to do something that is completely personal or family oriented in the middle of the day on the Wednesday, in the middle of the week or something, and not have guilt about that either. And so it's about figuring out how I can have harmony rather than this work-life balance where we switch off and now I'm at home and that's what I think about, and then when at work, that's all I think about. It's just so difficult to do in this day and age, to turn up to your work if you've got family issues going on, if you've got personal problems going on. We've just got to figure out a way to have harmony between the work and the personal side of things. So that's just an example that came to mind about being open to change and refining your philosophy as you go on. So
I
there you have
like
it.
that you talk about this harmony being this kind of flexibility, that it's not black and white to say work is at work and home's at home. Because I know even when I was an apprentice, I got sent into the workplace and mum and dad said, don't bring your work life home and don't take your personal life to work. And it's just not that straightforward. And it never was. But there was obviously this idea that it could be like that. And it was almost like an illusion. And I think it's just created all these masks that we sometimes wear in different environments because of the social norm or the expectations in those places. Now, you mentioned ego before, and I'm really curious to talk about that because I think it's quite easier to say that as a leader, we need to put our ego aside, but understanding what does that actually mean and what does that look like if we apply that in our real lives, whether we're just trying to lead amongst our peers or whether we are in that leader position. Because I think sometimes ego can have a lot of stigma and we don't maybe understand it as well as we could.
Yeah, that's a funny thing, the old ego. I'm not 100% sure you can put it aside. You can pretend to, but if something causes you anger because someone's attacked you in some way or let you down or what have you, you can pretend to put your ego aside. But I think in the quietness of your own mind, you're going, and thinking bad things about that person. So I'm not sure whether you can put it aside, but what I would say is what I encourage people to do in that sort of scenario where you should put your ego aside is focus on a thing that I would call emotional fitness. And so physical fitness is measured by how long it takes you to go from 180 beats per minute down to a resting heart rate, and the faster that happens, the fitter you are. That's how it's measured. And I think that there is an equivalent to emotional fitness as well, because we can get into a peak emotional state where we're really angry or frustrated or whatever the case may be. How long does it take you to get back to some semblance of normality where you can see things clearly and not be pushed around by emotion? And by practicing looking at things in different ways and being open and taking personal responsibility and practicing those things, I think you become more emotionally fit, and it takes you a lot less time to get back to a bit more level-headedness. I'm sure that or other people listening to this will know people who aren't very emotionally fit, and they can take that anger or that negativity or hatred or whatever it might be. They can hold on to it for weeks or months or even a lifetime, And so that's my take on the whole ego thing. I'm not sure that we can put it aside. Maybe we can. Maybe I just haven't learned how to yet. But in the absence of learning how to do that, I kind of go with this emotional fitness and go, that thing still frustrates me. So let me unpack that, analyze it, and figure out how in the future when that happens, I can deal with it better and get back to a better place of being able to look at it more effectively, more rapidly. And it's challenging.
I like that you acknowledge the fact that, it's not as black and white of saying, you can learn how to disassociate or put it completely to the side. But when it comes to that emotional fitness, or I imagine it's ultimately very similar to emotional intelligence, some of the key factors of emotional intelligence is awareness of how we're feeling and awareness of the impact that we have on other people. And being a leader might not mean that, we dismiss our feelings or that we don't respect them and feel them when we need to feel them, but that we don't let them dictate how we react, that we actually choose how we want to show up intentionally. And that does come with learning how to take a pause to digest what we're feeling and decide how we want to show up next.
Yeah, well, I think the pause is kind of really critical in that space, like to improve your emotional fitness. The pause is critical, and we're the only mammals on the planet that actually have a pause in between stimulus and response. And the more you jump into that pause and expand that pause before you decide upon what your response or reaction is going to be, the better you get at it. And I think the bigger that gap can become between stimulus and response. And I think the less time you spend in the gap when things happen, the gap closes up, and it gets smaller and smaller. And it's as simple as things like you're walking along the street and you're quite content, and that person who you just dislike immensely walks out of a shop and and you become aware of their existence. You were quite happy, and then the next instant you're angry, or you're scared, or you're frustrated, or whatever, because of the presence of that person. But if you're the kind of person that on purpose spends a bit more time in the gap between stimulus and response, it doesn't affect you like that, and you can go, what would be the best response right now? You can choose your response rather than just responding. And I think that's a really cool and important thing to practice, because when that sort of thing happens, like for instance, you're driving to work and somebody pulls out in front of you in the traffic, and you get into a bit of road rage and shake your fist and all of that sort of stuff, and that can ruin your whole day. And if you've been practicing some emotional fitness, when that person pulls out in front of you, you jump into the gap between stimulus and response and choose a better response. It doesn't ruin your whole day. And I think that people who don't do that, something can happen to them at the start of the day and they just react. And the person that pulled out in front of them maybe didn't even know that they pulled out in front of them, but they've ruined this other person's whole day, and they don't even know that they exist, and it lots of little things like that I think are quite funny, with the way that we just sort of get pushed around by things and allow things to control our day, rather than just taking a breath, like you said, getting into that pause and deciding what would be a better response, particularly from a leadership point of view. Because if you're about to go into a toolbox meeting or some sort of daily direction meeting we talk about, you're going to meet with your team and you've just got off the phone where you've had an argument with somebody or something's gone really pear-shaped, and you bring that energy into the group, and you're very short with them and a bit, abusive or what have you, because you're still emotionally charged from the previous conversation. That's not very high quality leadership. You've got to be able to go, okay, that was that. Now I've got to go in here and I've got to bring a certain energy and a certain example, because I've got to set this team off in the right direction today. So it's very important for me to think about, what emotion do I need to bring? What energy do I need to bring to this meeting to get the best out of it? And that previous conversation might not have been the best preparation. So I've got to take a moment and go, hang on, that's what I'm now got to achieve. What do I need to bring to this meeting emotionally, energetically? I think that's good leadership.
We've talked about that emotional fitness and also that self-leadership piece. What is the one leadership skill you see most builders you work with struggle with the most?
I am going to say effective communication. And the specific around that, I think, is listening. And it's not really their fault. It's something that we don't ever learn. Like through the school system, we don't learn what I call level 5 listening or empathic listening, listening genuinely with the intent to understand and not the intent to reply. We don't get taught that sort of stuff. We get told to be quiet and I'll let you know when I want your opinion. And we don't really get taught to listen effectively unless you go out and try and learn that through external courses and training and what have you. When you get into the workforce and what have you, like a great resource for this is the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. Habit 5: first seek to understand, then to be understood. And we kind of have been trained to think that good communication is me getting my message across to you, but it's not. Good communication is having somebody want to listen to you because they feel listened to and understood. And to be, I think, an effective leader, you've got to have that skill to listen with the intent to understand, so that person first feels understood. Then the chances are very high that they will want to listen to you and understand from your perspective. There's another great book, Australian author Hugh Mackay, many, many years ago, and it was called Why People Don't Listen. And in that he said, people tend to listen to those who listen to them. But he also used an analogy of why this is so difficult, particularly from a leadership point of view. You're trying to, as efficiently as possible, get people to do what you need them to do. And so what's the easiest way of doing that? Well, telling them. But if that's your leadership style, that's what you're going to have to do forever. You're going to be required forever. Tell me what to do. Now tell me what to do. Now tell me what to do. Versus training people and helping people to learn how to think critically, how to make effective decisions. And that takes time. And, Hugh Mackay in this old book uses an analogy of everyone is in like a cage. He talks about like being in a shark cage, and you're looking at the world through the bars in the shark cage. And the bars represent all of your beliefs and your values, and they've been built by past experiences. And so people, in an attempt to listen to somebody else, think, well, I'll look through their bars so I can see the world from their perspective, so I can understand. But the trouble is, you're in your cage. So you're looking through the bars of your cage, through the bars of their cage. And the only true way to genuinely understand from the other person's perspective is to open the door to your cage, swim out in unprotected in shark-infested waters to get into their cage to look at the world through their bars. And it's like that's a lot of risk to be able to understand from somebody else's perspective, but it is super powerful. There's you can quite often have incredibly valuable paradigm shifts if you're prepared to do that. And again, in Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he talks about a train ride on the subway in New York where he was sitting in the train, and 3 children and what seemed to be their father jumped on the train, and the father just sort of slumped down in the seat and sort of had his head looking out, just gazing out the window, and seemed to be really disconnected. And shortly after, the children were running amok. They're running up and down the aisle and jumping on the seats, and Stephen could notice that people in the carriage were visibly upset and getting quite frustrated with this. So Stephen thought, well, no one's doing anything about this. I'll do something about it. And he slid over and sat next to the father and said, hey, would you mind just sort of asking your children to settle down? They're really upsetting a lot of people in the train. And the father turned around and his eyes were quite glazed over and quite red, and he sort of shook his head and he said, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't even register. I didn't even notice. We've just come from the hospital where my wife, their mother, has just passed away, and quite honestly, I don't know what to do. And that happened to Stephen, but he tells the story to help people understand what a paradigm shift is. And in that moment, like prior to finding out what had happened, you want to slap the guy and say, get your act together and get your children under control. And, that's your perspective, and that's your reaction. That's your response. And then you find out this information, and in a heartbeat, you go from wanting to slap him around to asking, is there anything I can do to help? And that is what can happen if you are brave enough to get out of your cage, swim through the shark-infested waters and have a look at other people's situations through their cage, and you can eliminate a lot of blame and very unhelpful paradigms just by doing that. So it's probably the longest answer you've ever got to one of your questions in a podcast. About what would you suggest as an important leadership skill? There you have it.
That's fantastic, though, because it's very clear how it seems like a contradiction on paper to take less time and give less direction, but that if you don't do that, then you're not empowering your team, and you become a bottleneck for them being able to grow and progress and feel empowered in their own decisions and their own problem solving. And yeah, the stories you shared to really showcase that, I think, really captures that sense of vulnerability that can be in that new habit, and that not having as much control as well if we don't just give people the answers and give them solutions because we're the leader. In terms of that, what do you see as the biggest failure or blind spot happening in the industry right now? Is it around that lack of listening, or as an industry, is it something else that is the current blind spot?
Oh, no, we can go with that. Like it's a pretty good blind spot from a couple of perspectives. One, if we're looking at the team from a leadership point of view, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. So if I've got team members ringing me up and asking me questions, the quickest way to get them off the phone so I can get back to my work and get them going is to answer the question. But effectively, you're training them to not think. And every time they come up against a little bit of resistance, they call you. So you're creating a rod for your own back, and you're creating learned helplessness within them, versus I'm going to take a bit of extra time and ask them, well, in my absence, what would you have done? Like what are, say, 2 or 3 different solutions to this problem that you could consider? And they can give you those solutions, and then you can take a bit more time and go, well, let's unpack them and let's figure out what might be the best one, and go through some critical thinking exercises so they can practice how to figure stuff out. And after a while, they develop that confidence and that certainty, and they know that you've got their back, and you're not the bottleneck, and you're not the person that has to check everything before people can make a decision, and you give them an attaboy and a slap on the back and a well done when they do that off their own bat. And I remember this really cool example, and it was a true story. I don't remember what the business was, but it was sort of a corporate environment where one of the leaders, he would give anyone who made a mistake a crisp $100 bill. Like, he would find out when they made a mistake, and he'd go, here's your $100, because we cannot make progress and learn without making mistakes. It's just not possible. I mean, Tony Robbins says good judgment is a product of bad judgment. We only ever learn from stuffing it up. So stuffing it up's cool. It's good. So if you create a culture where making mistakes is, you get a butt kicking or you get berated, you're creating a culture where there will never, ever be any improvement. People will be butt covering all the time and making excuses. It wasn't my fault, and I'm not going to make a decision in case it all goes wrong. Nothing will happen. Whereas this guy would say, made a mistake, well done, here's $100. But if you made exactly the same mistake a second time, the culture in this organization was that you pay to fix the error. Because the whole idea is that we can make mistakes, but we've got to learn from the mistakes. So mistakes are cool, and we don't want you to make them on purpose to get $100, obviously. And it was maybe it's not the most effective way of doing it, but it was a good I guess, example of why it's really important not to berate people for making mistakes. Help people to learn from making their mistakes, and understand that it really wasn't even a mistake if we learned from it. It was a result. We did it this way, and that was the result we got. So we learned from it. It's like old mate who invented the light bulb. What was his name?
Thomas Edison?
That's him.
My history's not great.
I'm an electrician by trade. I don't know why I forgot his name. They even named a screw-in light bulb the Edison screw after him. But I just remember reading about some interview where he, after he discovered the filament, the material that he used for a light bulb filament, and they asked him, how did you keep going in the face of so much failure? Because he'd made something like 7,000 or 9,000 experiments before he found the right stuff. And he was genuinely confused about the question about, what do you mean failed experiments? Every single experiment was a success. Like, I'd proved that this, plasticine didn't make a very good light bulb filament material. So it was all, it was just success. It was feedback. It was information that got you closer and closer to what you needed. So I think that's a really cool concept to introduce into culture, is saying mistakes, that's how we learn. We don't need to make them on purpose, but we certainly need to use them to be able to move forward effectively and learn.
I like that you also kind of brought in this element of, when we are listening more as leaders, we're creating that space to be a coach for our own team, and that's what empowers them, and we stop being that bottleneck. I know that we could keep talking about for hours. It's been really insightful, and everything you've shared has just created a whole nother pathway of conversation we could explore. Being mindful of what we've covered so far, what would be your number one tip to apprentices, tradies, business owners about how they can show up as an everyday leader today?
I think the number one tip that I would give anybody is to build yourself what I would call a personal success ritual every day, where you are challenging yourself to put in your plan for the day at least one activity that is going to improve somehow how you think, a skill, or a personal system that you might use. So you have your own personal philosophy of constant, never-ending improvement for yourself, because I absolutely am convinced that the number one tool that creates the most effective leadership is example. And so we can talk and we can mentor and we can do all of that sort of stuff, but I think that the thing that influences people and leads people most effectively is example, and no words are required. That happens through observation, people observing how you dealt with that crisis, how you dealt with that abuse, how you dealt with that problem, that thing going wrong. And if you can lead yourself and just improve yourself a little bit every single day, I think you can bring some pretty good examples into your team and influence them that way.
That's a really powerful way to finish that. At the end of the day, how we show up and focusing on our own improvement can be enough. Like, leadership can be deep. There can be a lot of depth to what we can do to improve ourselves and how we can be a better leader, as we've captured in just our chat tonight. But it can also be simple and just saying, well, I'm going to take more responsibility for how I show up. So thank you so much for everything you've shared on the podcast today, Mick. I've definitely taken a lot away, and I'm sure the audience will as well. And obviously, if they want to learn more about your coaching and your philosophies, they can obviously connect with you and your podcast and the Builders Business Blackbelt.
Absolutely. It's been an absolute pleasure. I love talking about this stuff. It's fun. It's exciting. It's good stuff.
It is fantastic. Thanks so much again. If you enjoyed today's chat, please like this episode, subscribe to Tradies Who Lead, and share this podcast with your mates so that we can level up our leadership skills on site together. Thanks for joining me for this episode. We'll be back with another Everyday Legend in 2 weeks.